Welcome to Beyond Bacalhau, Cracking the Portuguese Business Code by Raquel Batista. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the 5th episode of Beyond Bacalhau, Cracking the Portuguese Business Code. Now, I promised you that we would have a guest over and then I would talk about some things more technical. So I guess this is one of those technical podcasts, but I think this is very useful. And I wanted to start out by talking a little bit about the basic elements of creating a company in Portugal, which is different than the elements that we need to create a business. Okay, so this podcast will be exclusively focused on creating or registering a company in Portugal because this is my main services or one of the service that I do the most. And there's a lot of things that go into creating a company. And so a lot of people think that they're completely ready to have a company. But then in the end, there's so many things that are specific to Portugal that you really need to be aware of. And they're essential if you want to register a company here and be successful here and a thriving business here. Okay. So as I always say, surround yourself with good professionals because those will be the foundations to have a nice and solid business for thriving and growing. Okay. One of those bases is accountant. You really need to have a good accountant because that can be a make or break. Okay, so if you have a great accountant, they can preview your costs. They can let you know about tips and tricks that you can do to lower your costs or to optimize your tax. They can let you know of grants, of other things that you can use. And if you don't have a good accountant, they may not file on time. They may not let you know about things that you could use for your company. And that could really mean a huge open faucet of costs down the drain. Okay, so that is one big element of creating a solid company in Portugal. And the other, I would say that it's the legal and business consultancy thing. So you want to know what the rules are in Portugal because although you have an accountant, you still need to know how things work. And that's a little bit how I do when I have clients that want to create companies. I do 2 or 3 sessions because I want to explain what it means to have a company in Portugal in the sense of what are the taxes that are applicable, what is VAT, what is social security, what is corporate income tax. And because we've been over the main charges in another episode of this podcast, I am not going to go into any tax thing or social security thing. You already know that. We've already spoken about that. So I am going to tell you about the elements that we need or the information that we need to create a company. So first, I think that the main thing that you have to understand is that it's one thing to have an idea to have a company or a business. It's another to create an actual company. When you create a company, and this is very different from being a freelancer, we will have also another episode about the differences between freelancing and companies. But when you have a company, you create an entity outside of yourself. It's not just you anymore. Okay. You create an organization that has its own NIF. It has its own social security number. It has its own name and it has its own address. So it's not you. It's going to have its own bank account and it's a different entity from you. You manage it or you may outsource that management, but it's not you. Whereas in the freelancing world, every income is yours. So there's no separate entity from you. So even when you're issuing invoices or whatever, it's still your NIF. When you have a company, this is a whole separate being, as I like to call it. It's your baby. Okay. So you have to understand that it has autonomy. It has financial autonomy from you. It has management autonomy from you. And even the liability, the go-to main type of company that we use when creating a company, unless it's a corporation, it's a limited liability company, much similar to the LLCs in the US. And what does that limited liability mean? That means that your responsibility is limited to the amount of share capital that you put in that company, okay? Minus taxes. Okay, taxes, they will go after you personally. It's all hell will break loose if you don't pay your taxes in your company. Okay, but other than that, other than tax bills that you don't pay on time, your responsibility when you have a company is restricted to the amount of share capital that you put in that company. Okay, and this share capital, what it means is that it's the first amount of money that the company has to start operations. So it's like the piggy bank of the company. So there's no limit. You can choose from €1 per shareholder to the sky's the limit. I always say that you should at least have enough. Let's say you're creating something from zero, you should have enough to make the company survive for 1 year, because it's going to take at least that much to get the business off the ground, to get your clients coming in, and you will have some fixed costs along the way that you'll always have to pay. Okay, we will talk about also those fixed costs. In order to find out and do the math on what it is that you should define as the share capital, so as the piggy bank of the company to start, I always say do the math on what it is that you need to get your operations running. Now, this is very dependent on the concrete or specific business that you're in. The fixed cost that you cannot go over is the monthly cost of the accountant, for one, and second is the social security cost. Okay, if there is one, because there may be a company where if the shareholders pays social security somewhere else, they won't need to pay social security in this company. But rule of thumb, you'll have these two fixed costs in your company. Okay, now the accountant, usually they charge 13 months, because there's 1 month that's the annual filing of the tax. And it's very different from the US. The obligations, the tax obligations, and the filing obligations that you have in Portugal are hugely different than, for instance, the US, because in the US, you can have a dormant company that you don't even have any activity of. And once a year you look at the papers and then you file your corporate income tax. It's not like that here. We've talked about the corporate income tax, so there's a lot of work that goes in to filing tax obligations in Portugal. And so one of the fixed costs is your accountant. There's, of course, prices for every pocket. I always recommend that you don't go under 200 to 250 euros a month plus VAT, because if you do, they will not give you the time of day, because you won't be profitable as a client for them. And so they will not invest any time teaching you, training you, letting you know of what is new that you can profit for your business. Okay, so at least when you know that you're a profitable client for your accountant, you know that they are going to give you their attention. And so I always recommend that you go for at least that type of accountant. So choose wisely your accountant. That's going to be one of your main um, cornerstones of your business. Okay, so that is very important. So if you're building your business from scratch and you want to have your company at least on its own feet for a year, you need to do the math on these 13 months of accounting costs and social security, if that is the case, and then for 12 months, and then see what number that comes up. Now, you'll also, depending on the activity, let's say it's a consulting activity, you might want to consider buying a computer, you might want to consider buying a camera, whatever, a microphone, whatever it is that you need to operate. If it's a restaurant, my God, you're going to need 1,000 different things, or whatever it is. So try to do the math if you're going from scratch of what is the amount that you're going to need for your company to be independent from you as shareholder and have enough money to survive on its own for at least 1 year. And I say it's 1 year. You can, you can go overboard and go way over that amount, but it's just a year is just the minimum timing to get your business to start having some traction, to have some clients walking in your door. Okay. If you want to go more, by all means, do that. Now, I've created some companies for people that already had like an activity registered as a freelancer. And if that is the case, you know that you are going to have clients from day one. Okay. So you know that you're going to have income coming from day one. And so that is different. So in that case, your share capital could be much less because you know that right off the bat, you will have money coming in. And you'll also already have a pretty good idea of what expenses you will have for the business. So when you're transferring from a freelancer to a company, I would say you have a pretty good idea of the cost that you have and of the income that you have. So have a nice, solid share capital. I would say never go under €1,000 because it's not, it's not a legal limit, but in terms of business networking and relationship with your clients, it's not a good image to have a company that has under €1,000 of share capital. It looks like it's, a very amateur business that you didn't invest any money on. So have at least that. And so share capital, I would say this is one of the big definitions that you have to think about. And another thing that you have to think about, and this takes us a long time when we're creating companies with clients, is the name. The name, people. So it's a different entity. You are going to name your baby. Okay. And now I know a lot of people have these great ideas for great names. It's been countless times where I've had to pop that dream and pop the bubble of those people that wanted to call their businesses whatever, because there are some rules when it comes to naming your company. Okay, there's 3 ways that you can name a company. You can make up your own name. So if you have a name, for instance, Lighthouse Consulting, I had this name in my head because, I live in Cascais and there's the lighthouses and everything. And so that was a name that I just made up. Okay, so you can do that. By all means, you can make up your own name. We will have to test it. There is a way, there's a website where we can see the probability of that name being authorized or not. Okay, depending on the region, depending on the type of business, and the correspondence of already operating businesses. Okay, but it is an authorization step, so it is going to take you longer. You always need to start with a certificate of the authorization for the name. So that is going to cost you, now it's €75, but I don't want this to be too dated. But that is one way. You can make up your own name. Then it can be approved or not, but you can make up your own name. Now, the second alternative to come up with a name for your company is to do it with your own personal name. So let's say Raquel Batista Limited. That could be an idea. That gets us a bigger chance of approval because it's your own name. So it's not, unless there's other people with exact the same name in the exact line of business and the exact location. Other than that, it's going to have a high chance of authorization. So you can go with your own name. There are some reasons that may push you aside from doing that with your own name. I always say that you want to have things separate. So you want to have your business and you want to have your personal life. And even from a growth and scalability point of view, if you connect your business too much with you as an individual, then you can't grow. Then it's like we've said, sometimes it's a lifestyle job, but it is not a business, because you can't scale it, you can't sell it, and there's just one of you. So you really, my advice is always to separate both things. So I am Raquel Batista and I own Lighthouse Consulting, but I am not Lighthouse Consulting. Lighthouse Consulting is a team of people that provide a number of services, and I happen to be the CEO and founder. It happens to be built to my image and my branding and all of that I choose, but there's scalability there. So, if you do want to give it your own name, you do you. But think about this. Think about the need to separate your business and your personal life. Okay. Even if then you want to sell your business, you'll have to change your name, because the other person won't want your name in their company. So there's a number of reasons why you want to think about having your own name in your company. The third way is to pick a name from a list of pre-authorized names. Now, I always have a great time with clients when I tell them this and we go over that list, because you can go there. It's called Firma de Denominações or Bolsa de Denominações. So it's online. You can check it out, like Google pre-approved commercial registry names in Portugal or whatever. And the reason why I have such a good time and we always laugh is because it has the most extraordinary, awful, godforsaken names that I don't know who imagines, who comes up with them, but kudos to them, because it's like a list of the most awful names that someone kind of thought that would be adjustable to a company. So it almost feels like they're kidding when you go through the list, because it's like, I don't know, pink flamingo with the wings in the air or whatever. So they're very awkward and very strange names. But in any case, it's a very good way to make sure that the name and that the company is authorized, because you know that those are names that are authorized. And let me tell you, in this past year, especially in December and in November, it started a little bit like this, but in December of 2024, definitely there was so much difficulty approving any company that didn't have a pre-authorized name, that the timeline of authorizing a company with a made-up name or a personal name was like a month. It took me a month to create companies with personal names or made up names. I've had one process where we've had to go like 2 or 3 times because they didn't authorize it. And then we tried another name and then they didn't authorize. So you see, it is a kind of a delicate, difficult issue sometimes to struggle with. So if you do want to choose one of those names, it's much better. It's way faster. So you'll shave off, weeks off of the timeline of creation of company. If you're in a hurry to create a company, let go of those ideas. Just pick a freaking name out of that list, because otherwise, it's going to take 2 months to authorize the company. But, there are some cute names. I've had actually some clients, they know who they are. I hope they listen to this podcast. I'm going to send them to them. That they went over the list and they made it a point to choose the very worst one that they could find. And so I'm not going to say the name of the company, of course, but it was very, very, very funny, because in the end, the company does have a horrendous name, but it's so horrendous that it kind of sucks, and it kind of is so funny that then it's not horrendous anymore. Then it's really funny. And these are, it's a very humorous couple. So it really is their image. So you want to go into those pre-authorized names to have a look at the names that you can choose. Now, because a lot of people now are realizing that the only way to approve a company in under a month is actually to choose one of those names, they are, although they're terrible and awful, they are flying off the shelf, so to speak. So when you do choose a name, you have to choose a name like when you're ready to file for the creation. Otherwise, you're going to choose three names, and by the time we start to create the company or file the papers, the name is gone. Okay, so take a look, have fun taking a look at those names, but then kind of have in mind that you have to choose the final name once you're at the point that you're filing for the creation of the company. Okay, so the name is that. Of course, it has to, if it's a limited liability company, it has to have the LDA at the end. If it's a one-person shareholder business, it has to have a unipessoal LDA. So it's a one shareholder company, limited liability company. So, but that is possible. The same rules for the names, everything, same rules for the share capital, nothing changes. The only thing that is different is that instead of two or more shareholders, it just has one. The rest is, everything is the same. Actually, one of the things that you should think about is that you can only have one unipessoal for person, okay? Other than that, that is fine. So we've covered share capital and we've covered the name. Now, what is the business about? You'll have an activity, right? You have a certain business, you have a certain idea, so you are doing something. Now, for every activity that you can think about, there is a list of a commercial activity code that you are going to have to choose. So, when I create companies, this is something that I do. I just want people to really explain to me what it is that they think about, that they think that they are going to do, and in their own words, what their activity is going to be. And then I'll translate that into the commercial activity code. So it's CAE, CAIS. And the company can have, a high number of different commercial codes. What's important to retain is that you can only execute the activities for which you are authorized and for which you have the authorizing code, so the CAE. You cannot pursue an activity that you don't have the CAI for, that you're not authorized for. And so what I always say is, because you can have a number of different activities within the same company, try to think about what it is that you want to do now and in the near future, because you can have different CAIs that you're not going to use immediately. So there's not an obligation to use those CAIs. But if you do, you have to have them in your registry. Okay, so they can be dormant, they can be there. You can just have them in your pocket. But what you cannot do is execute or operate on an activity that you don't have the CAI to, okay? And of course, you can change along the way. If you decide to have another activity along the way, you can add another activity to the commercial registry, but it's going to mean another change to your registry. So another 200 and something euros just for registry costs alone. So you want to save up that money and think about all the activities that you want to perform. And so aside from that activity, you are also going to have to decide on, if you have more than one shareholders, what are the quotas of each shareholder? Because if you're one person, that's decided. But if it's two people or more, you can decide different percentages, okay? Different ownership amounts of the company. And there's no limitations. You can decide whatever you want to. You don't have to have the same percentage, so you can have shareholders with a bigger percentage than others. Whatever it is, you can customize that to whatever your needs are. But these percentages have to be defined, and those percentages are equal to the percentage of the share capital that person has to deposit in the company's bank account so that the company can start its activity. So let's say I'm going to go into business with another person, and we're going to have a share capital of 5K, but I will be, I will have a lesser quota, a lesser part of the company. That will be the correspondent in money, in euros, in the share capital of the company. So you can have different percentages of share capital, and therefore quota or ownership in the company. So what else do you have to have? You have to have a manager, because a company is, again, as we've said, an entity, an independent entity. So it needs someone to manage it. It needs a brain. Okay. And that brain is the manager. You can have several managers. You can outsource managers. You don't need the shareholders don't have to be managers. You can outsource that. That's fine. But you do need managers. And those managers you'll also have to decide as a shareholder, what does how many signatures, for instance, how many managers does it take to commit the company, so that legally something is binding, whatever act is binding to the company. So let's say you have 3 managers, you can say that it takes 2 signatures of whatever managers are at the place at the time. And this is very important, because when you have a bigger business, one of the ways to control the business is to require those 2 signatures. Okay. And you can define that you always require a signature of a given manager, for instance. That is possible. Or even that you require always to bind the company the signatures of all managers. So all of this is customizable. All of this can be defined to suit your needs. But this is also something that you have to think about. Okay. Think about who is going to manage your company. Think about how many managers will be managing your company. And if there is more than one, then how many signatures will bind the company? So if you need to sign a contract, you need to open a bank account, how many people do you need to have to sign those papers? Okay. Another thing that we need to talk about is a home, because a company also needs to have an address. Now, a lot of people ask me, can I make it my home? Yes, you can you can define the company address as your home address. I don't recommend it. For one, because of what we've spoken earlier, which is the distinction between business and private life. And remember that the information about your company will be public. Anyone that Googles the name of your company will immediately have access to the address, to other informations about your company. So I think it's on the safe side to really set things aside. And so there's so many virtual offices nowadays that you can hire. You can register your company address there. They take care of correspondence. They scan, they send it over to you, or you can pick that up yourself. Different prices, Google around. That is something that I always recommend clients. There's a number of them in the country. So they're also, a lot of times they offer offices for rent if you have a special, if you have a meeting that you have to have someone over, because a lot of times people worry, okay, if I don't rent an office, where am I going to have meetings? This was something that came up actually at the start of my business. And I always say, have the least cost possible. And so I knew that I wouldn't have meetings in person every day. And so I didn't want to commit to rent a freaking office for me to be there when there was no need to have meetings every freaking day. So consider not renting an office at all, but renting a virtual office. And then when you need to have a special meeting with guests or whatever, you can rent one of the offices. If you need more space, I'm sure there are services where they have that available. And it's very cost efficient, because instead of 300, 1,000, 500, whatever rent, you would pay for an office, you pay 50 euros, 75 euros, whatever, depending on the level of service. So address. Now, the company is going to have, as we've talked about in the other podcast, it's going to have its own NIF, its own social security number. So it has its own address and its own name, and it has its own piggy bank, as we've covered. When you create a company, you're going to have two very important documents, without which you cannot even open a bank account or do much for the company. So you will need the commercial registry. When the company is created, you'll be given a code to consult online, and you don't have to print it out. Anyone that wants to know what your business is about, what's the name, the official company info, you just give out that code and they can go online and see that updated information. So it's the commercial registry and the RCBE. Now, the RCBE is the beneficial registry, the beneficial ownership registration. In Portugal, because of anti-money laundering issues and terrorism finance and such, we need to know who's the ultimate beneficiary of every company. Okay, so you will have to give the information about who's the ultimate owner of that company. And usually, if you're direct shareholders, it's going to be you. If it's a company that is a shareholder of another company, because yes, that is possible, then you will need to define who the shareholders of that company is, because those are the ultimate beneficiaries of the company that you're about to create. So that is also something that you need. And not to go overboard, one of the other documents that you're going to need is going to be the bylaws. Now, the bylaws are like the Bible of your company. It will have all of these informations that we've talked about: the name, the share capital, the NIF, the social security number, the address, the activity, all of those things, the managers. All of those things will be in the bylaws. The bylaws is the rule book of the company, okay? It's a fairly simple document, but you cannot have a company without that document. And to wrap things up, because I don't want you to fall asleep, and my voice is not cooperating anymore. These are the basic elements to create a company in Portugal. And I hope this was very useful. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you now have more of an idea of what is required to have a business in Portugal. And we'll meet again at the next podcast. Thank you. Mwah.